All right, today we are embarking on a massive, honestly fascinating journey. We are going to explore a millennium and a half of history, but we're not doing it by looking at battles or kings. Instead, we're looking at how we as humans have actually understood ourselves. We're going to trace the shifting concept of the self through 1,500 years of English literature. It is an absolutely incredible story of evolution.
I mean, think about it. How did we get from ancient tribes singing about literal monsters and dragons around a fire to modern authors writing deep, complex novels about our own fractured, anxious minds? What exactly happened in between to change our focus so drastically? Well, that is exactly what we are going to uncover.
Here is the roadmap for our explainer today. 1. Monsters to Middle English. 2. Renaissance to rising novels. 3. Romantic rebellion and Victorian realism. 4. The fractured modern mind. And finally, 5. Contemporary voices and enduring themes. Let's dive right in.
Before we really get going, let's just take a second to grasp the massive timeline we're covering today, literally from the 400s all the way to today. Now, what you'll notice on this journey is that almost every single era acts as a direct, sometimes pretty aggressive reaction to the one that came just before it. It's kind of like this massive cultural pendulum swinging back and forth. Keep that pendulum in mind as we travel.
Section 1. From Monsters to Middle English, the origins of the human story.
So picture this. The earliest surviving English literature wasn't meant to be read quietly alone in a room. It was part of a vibrant oral tradition. Imagine being part of an Anglo-Saxon tribe, right? Your stories, your history, your values, they were retold, resung, and revoiced out loud. Works like the epic poem Beowulf or Cadman's hymn were highly formal, elevated, and spoken aloud to ensure cultural unity and survival way before written text was a common thing. It was literature as a literal lifeline.
But then, history shifts. We move from Old English, where the focus is entirely on basic survival, battling literal monsters and tribal loyalty, into the Middle English period, right after the Norman conquest in 1066. And here's our first major pendulum swing. The language absorbs French and Latin influences, it matures. Suddenly we aren't just fighting dragons anymore, we are looking at each other. By the late 1300s, writers like Geoffrey Chaucer in his Canterbury Tales are penning these witty, razor-sharp observations of social classes, manners, and highly diverse human characters. Literature has zoomed in on society itself.
Moving right along to Section 2. Renaissance to rising novels, human flaws, and the era of reason.
Okay, you absolutely cannot talk about the Renaissance without bringing up its ultimate avatar, William Shakespeare. This quote by his contemporary Ben Jonson perfectly captures why Shakespeare still matters so much to us today. He wasn't just writing for the 1590s. The guy mastered the human condition. His characters struggle with profound, universal flaws, heroic actions tinged with serious hubris, lust mixed with the joy of discovery, and just deep, complex rage. Whether it's the intense ambition of Macbeth or the comedic trickery in A Midsummer Night's Dream, Shakespeare essentially made the internal human flaw the center of the universe.
Now, this deep internal exploration didn't just stop with theater, it bled right into poetry. In the 17th century, we see the rise of the metaphysical poets like John Donne. They used this fascinating device called a metaphysical conceit. Basically, they took massive, abstract philosophical ideas like the soul, the enduring nature of love, or the shadow of death, and explained them using strict reasoning, wit, and incredibly unusual concrete comparisons. It was this rigorous, almost scientific approach to the deepest human passions.
As this builds into the 18th century, the Enlightenment is in full swing. Society is suddenly craving order, logic, and reason. And out of this craving comes the explosive rise of the English novel. Writers like Daniel Defoe and Jonathan Swift are writing for a brand new, highly literate middle class. This era becomes heavily focused on satire, intricate character sketches, and defining exactly what the societal rules are. It's really literature acting as a mirror to a highly structured society.
Section 3. Romantic rebellion, Victorian realism, emotion, nature, and society.
Remember that swinging pendulum we talked about earlier? Well, you can only have strict rules and cold logic for so long before humanity rebels. The 18th century Augustan ideals of logic, satire, and high society get aggressively overthrown by the Romantic rebellion. Suddenly, poets are totally abandoning restrained writing. They want raw, unfiltered emotion. They champion the individual over society. They turn away from the smoggy city and look to nature and the sublime as the ultimate source of truth and inspiration.
Honestly, no one sums up this philosophy better than William Wordsworth.
For him and his peer Samuel Taylor Coleridge, poetry wasn't about clever satire at all. It was literally the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. Nature wasn't just pretty scenery, it was a revered, transcendental teacher. They wrote to speak directly to real emotions and to the common man, totally stripping away the classical, elite subjects of the past.
But reality hits hard. The romantic escape into nature collides head-on with the rapid, smoky, gritty reality of Victorian industrialization in the 1800s. Literature is forced right back to reality. Writers like Charles Dickens and George Eliot begin producing massive, sweeping, character-driven novels. And here's a fun connection to today. These novels were highly serialized, published chapter by chapter in magazines. It was literally the Victorian equivalent of binge-watching your favorite character drama. Dickens used this format brilliantly to draw massive public sympathy for the impoverished and the vulnerable, like Oliver Twist, turning literature into a tool for razor-sharp social critique.
All right, Section 4, the fractured modern mind, the shattered psyche.
So, hitting the 20th century, with the unimaginable trauma of World War I and rapid mechanization, the old linear ways of storytelling suddenly felt totally inadequate. The external world seemed horrific and frankly meaningless. So modernist writers turned fiercely inward. They developed a groundbreaking technique called stream of consciousness. Instead of describing what a character is doing from the outside, they abandoned external reality to dig deep into the messy, chaotic, unfiltered flow of the human psyche.
Virginia Woolf is pretty much the absolute avatar for this modernist interiority. Actually, scratch that. She's the absolute master of it. In novels like Mrs. Dalloway, she focused on just a single day, or even a few hours, but she achieved this incredibly graceful weaving of her characters' mental activities with the external world. This fractured, constantly shifting narrative style perfectly mirrors the overwhelming, subjective way we actually experience modern life. I mean, we don't think in neat, perfectly linear sentences, do we? Our minds wander, we remember things, and we react all at once.
And then, following World War II, yep, you guessed it, the aesthetic shifts yet again. Modernism's serious, heavy inner search for meaning, championed by writers like James Joyce, gives way to postmodernism. If modernism is this tragic search for lost meaning, postmodernism, seen in writers like Samuel Beckett and Thomas Pynchon, is more like playful chaos. Postmodernism is deeply skeptical of any grand narratives or absolute truths. It features decentralized, sometimes paranoid storytelling, basically embracing the fact that in a hyper-commercialized technological world, pinning down a single objective truth might literally be impossible.
Finally, Section 5. Contemporary voices, enduring themes, looking inward and outward.
So, what does this all mean? How does literature today synthesize 1,500 years of history? Well, today, literature looks both inward and outward simultaneously. We live in a thoroughly cosmopolitan, incredibly globalized world. Contemporary voices, like Zadie Smith and Ian McEwan, are tackling massive, complex issues. They focus on post-colonial identities, navigating differences in a global society, and untangling the lingering webs of historical trauma. Authors today act like these incredible cultural memory keepers, trying to figure out how the vast history we just covered actually shapes who we are right now. But look, if there is one thing you should really take away from this entire explainer, it's this. Despite the wild swings in style, from oral epics to highly structured sonnets to serialized Victorian novels all the way to the fractured stream of consciousness, the grand human themes remain exactly the same. Love and relationships, the absolute devastation of war and the hope for peace, and the desperate, lifelong search for identity and the self. These themes are the beating heart of the whole shebang, connecting us directly to the Anglo-Saxons telling stories around the fire 1,500 years ago.
Which brings us to our final, provocative thought. We've seen how every era's literature perfectly reflects its unique anxieties and triumphs. So I leave you with this question. When the historians of the future look back at the literature, the blogs, the social media, and the digital texts of our specific moment in time, what will the literature of our era say about us? Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer. Keep reading, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next one.